Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going deep on a story that, well, it's got it all, really.
Oh, yeah.
We've got police misconduct, possible racial profiling, definitely abuse of power, and a whole lot of questions that need answering. And it all starts with a pair of handcuffs.
Okay, I'm intrigued already.
Right. So our main source for this deep dive is a recent article from the Atlanta Black Star. And it centers around Robert Baker, a black man from Vallejo, California.
Okay, Vallejo.
Yeah, so Baker's just sitting in his car when he's approached by a police lieutenant, Jodi Brown.
Hmm.
Brown asks for his ID, standard procedure,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
But Baker, he doesn't have his driver's license on him at the time.
Oh.
Yeah, and Brown, she decides to detain him. And this is where things get a little, well, unusual.
Unusual how?
Brown tries to put Baker in handcuffs, but these aren't your everyday run-of-the-mill handcuffs. These are gold-plated.
Gold-plated.
Gold-plated, and get this, engraved with her name and badge number.
Wow. I mean, have you ever heard of personalized handcuff before?
I haven't. Me neither. It's definitely not standard issue, right? And it kind of makes you wonder, what's the purpose here? Is it about upholding the law, or is it more about, personal authority?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in a situation like this, shouldn't an officer's focus be on, public safety, following procedure, the gold-plated handcuffs? It just feels like it's more about a display of power, you know, and that blurring the lines between personal and professional, that can be a slippery slope.
Absolutely. And, things escalate pretty quickly from there. Baker, fearing for his safety, he drives off.
He drives off with the handcuffs on.
Well, with one of the handcuffs still attached to his wrist.
So now not only do you have this question of the officer's intentions, but now you've got a missing piece of police equipment with her information on it.
Right. And 3 days later, more than a dozen officers, they raid the home where Baker was living with his parents.
Whoa, for one handcuff.
Yeah, they break into the house, ransack the place, even though the family, they were in the process of moving at the time.
That's intense. So what was the justification for such a forceful raid?
Well, the warrant was specifically for the missing handcuff, but, legally speaking, police, they need probable cause for an arrest, a warrant for a search. And in this case was recovering a piece of equipment, even if it was the officer's personal property. Does that justify that level of force?
That's a good question, right? I mean, the severity of the raid just seems way out of proportion to the alleged crime. And in this case, it really highlights a larger issue we see time and time again, police overreach. Especially when it comes to black individuals. This kind of disproportionate response, it happens far too often.
And unfortunately, the story, it doesn't end there. After the raid, the harassment of Baker and his family, it continued. He's followed by an officer on a motorcycle, ends up causing him to crash and break his leg.
Oh, come on.
And then, get this, his parents are pulled over at gunpoint in San Francisco.
At gunpoint.
Based on Brown's report that their car was connected to a robbery. And the lawsuit that was filed later, it claims that Brown's actions, they were malicious, that she was intentionally trying to cause Baker harm because she was upset about losing her, you guessed it, gold-plated handcuffs.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? I mean, if these allegations are true, it really raises serious concerns about this officer's fitness for duty. And it makes you question, what kind of oversight is in place at the Vallejo Police Department? Like, where are the checks and balances here?
That's what I kept thinking. Surely this can't be the end of the story, right? Like, there has to be more to it.
Well, what's even more concerning is that despite all of this, Brown has been promoted to lieutenant.
Promoted. Seriously.
Yeah, and get this. Her salary last year was over $226,000. And you look at her bio on the police website, it talks about her, quote, exemplary service.
So are we talking about the same person here? Because it's like looking at two completely different realities.
I know, right? But if you start digging a little deeper, you'll find 3 prior lawsuits against Brown. One involved the tasering of an elderly disabled man, and then there were multiple arrests for what seemed like really minor offenses. There's even a complaint filed against her by a fellow officer alleging retaliation and harassment.
Okay, so this isn't just a single bad apple situation.
Yeah, exactly. Brown's case, it's not an isolated incident. It really reflects a wider systemic problem that we see over and over again in law enforcement, a lack of accountability. And when you don't have accountability, that's when public trust erodes. And that just fuels the tension between communities and the police who are supposed to be serving them.
It's a vicious cycle. So 7 months later, those gold-plated handcuffs, they're still missing. But this story, it's not just about some lost property. Baker's mother, Kellyanne Coulter, she wrote on Facebook about the damage to their home, the injustice her son faced. She said, quote, "They came in and broke down the gate and door, the garage door, and literally trashed our Beox Edie possessions ready to move."
That's heartbreaking. It speaks to the real human cost of these events. For the Coulter family, this wasn't just about a missing item. This was a violation of their home, their sense of safety, their security.
It's a powerful reminder that these aren't just abstract issues we're talking about. These are real people's lives that are being impacted. And it makes you wonder if even gold-plated handcuffs, a symbol of, personal authority, if that's not enough to ensure accountability, then what will it take to bring about real change in policing?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What will it take to create a system where the immense power that we entrust to law enforcement is exercised responsibly, ethically, and with true accountability? This whole thing with the gold-plated handcuffs and then, everything that followed, it really highlights a much bigger problem.
Yeah.
The fact that Baker's parents were pulled over at gunpoint in a different city
Right.
based solely on Brown's word.
Right.
That just shows you how easily things can spiral out of control when there's no real system of checks and balances in place.
It's terrifying to think about, really, and it makes you wonder about, implicit bias and how that plays into all of this.
Absolutely. There's been a lot of research on this,
Okay.
Yeah, like the Sentencing Project, they've done a lot of work in this area.
Okay.
And their studies show that black drivers, they're about 20% more likely to get stopped by police compared to white drivers. And when they are stopped, they're more than twice as likely to be searched. Even when you account for things like age, gender, the time of day, it's still a huge disparity.
So this experience that Baker and his family went through, it's not just some random isolated incident.
Right. It fits into a much larger pattern, a pattern that's deeply troubling.
And it seems like that pattern has consequences that go way beyond these individual cases.
Yeah, when you have communities of color being disproportionately targeted by law enforcement, it creates this atmosphere of fear and mistrust. And that just makes it almost impossible to build those positive relationships that are so important for effective policing.
It's almost like it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
The mistrust leads to more conflict, which then just reinforces those existing biases.
That's exactly it. And, it's important to remember that this isn't just a problem for communities of color.
Right.
It affects everyone, because when people don't trust the police to treat them fairly, equally, they're less likely to cooperate, less likely to report crimes. They might not even see the police as a source of help when they need it.
It undermines the whole system, basically. And in this particular case, the one in Vallejo, it's hard to understand how L.T. Brown could have been promoted, given everything we've talked about.
I know, right? It makes you wonder about the Vallejo Police Department and their internal review process.
Yeah.
Like, are they really serious about accountability? If an officer who's had multiple lawsuits filed against her, allegations of misconduct, if that officer can still climb the ranks,
Yeah.
what kind of message does that send, both to other officers and to the community?
It almost feels like a reward for bad behavior.
And that's the perception that needs to change. There needs to be a very clear message. Misconduct will not be tolerated. But it's going to take a multifaceted approach to really address these issues.
So let's talk about solutions then. What can actually be done to fix these systemic problems within law enforcement?
Well, one area that's been getting a lot of attention is police training.
Okay.
Officers, they need comprehensive training in de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and implicit bias.
That sounds good in theory, but will more training actually lead to real, meaningful change?
Well, training, it's just one piece of the puzzle. It
Yep.
has to be part of the larger cultural shift within police departments, a shift that prioritizes accountability and community engagement. It's about empowering officers to step in when they see a colleague doing something wrong. And it's about holding supervisors responsible for what their subordinates do.
What about the role of technology? Could body cameras be part of the solution?
Body cameras, they can definitely be a valuable tool.
Okay.
They can provide evidence if there's an allegation of misconduct,
Right.
and they can help to protect both officers and civilians.
Sure.
But we have to be realistic about their limitations.
Like what? What kind of limitations?
Well, sometimes body cameras, they don't capture the whole context of a situation. The angle of the camera, where the officer is standing, things like that, can all affect what's actually recorded. And there are also questions about how that data is stored, who has access to it, the potential for misuse. So body cameras are a step in the right direction.
Okay.
but they have to be implemented carefully
Right.
as part of a broader strategy.
So what else can be done?
Another important reform is creating independent oversight boards.
I've heard of those, but how do they actually work?
Basically, they provide a way to hold police departments accountable from the outside. They're made up of people from the community who review complaints against officers.
Okay.
They investigate allegations, and they can recommend disciplinary actions.
So it's a way to make sure those complaints are being taken seriously and that the process is transparent.
Exactly. When police departments investigate themselves, there's always going to be that question of bias, or whether they're just trying to protect their own. Independent oversight boards can help to prevent that and build public trust.
Seems like a pretty straightforward solution, but I'm guessing there are people who aren't thrilled about this idea.
Yeah, some law enforcement groups, they push back against external oversight. They say it undermines their authority and makes it harder for them to do their job. But real accountability, it doesn't weaken law enforcement. It makes it stronger.
Because it builds trust, which is essential for effective policing.
Exactly. When communities trust the police, they're going to be more likely to work with them, report crimes, and create safer neighborhoods for everyone.
Makes sense.
And then, of course, there's the bigger issue of systemic racism. That's a really complex problem.
It feels almost impossible to fix.
There's no easy answer, no quick fix. It requires a fundamental shift in how we think about race, power, and privilege.
Yeah.
We have to be honest about how our history and our current systems perpetuate racial inequality.
It's such a huge, daunting challenge.
It is. But we can't let the size of the problem paralyze us.
Right.
Change starts by acknowledging that systemic racism exists and by having those uncomfortable conversations about how it affects policing and everything else.
So we need to look at our own biases, challenge those policies that are discriminatory, and work towards a more just and equitable society for everyone.
That's it.
Okay, so bringing it back to the case of the elderly disabled man who was tased by Jodi Brown.
Yeah.
That incident, it really highlights the need for better training, better de-escalation techniques.
Absolutely. Officers need the skills and resources to handle all kinds of different situations without having to resort to force,
Right.
especially when they're dealing with people who are vulnerable.
Yeah, it should always be a last resort, not the first option.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that there has to be accountability when an officer uses excessive force or engages in misconduct. There have to be consequences. And that's where independent oversight boards and civilian review boards can play a really important role. They can help make sure justice is served.
And what about police unions? A lot of people criticize them for protecting officers, even when those officers have committed serious misconduct.
That's a valid point. Police unions, they're there to advocate for their members, to protect their rights and their well-being.
Right.
But that advocacy should never come at the expense of accountability or public safety. We need to find that balance between supporting law enforcement officers and making sure there's transparency and justice.
It's a tough balance to strike. But the end goal should be a system that works for everyone, both the police and the community.
That's right. And getting there is going to take ongoing dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to challenge the way things have always been done. We need to strive for a system of policing that's fair, equitable, and accountable to the people it's supposed to serve.
So we've talked about solutions at the departmental level and at the societal level, but what about individual citizens? What can we do to help make a difference?
The first thing is awareness. Stay informed about these issues. Read articles, watch documentaries, listen to podcasts like this one. Educate yourself.
But it's not enough to just be aware, right? We have to actually engage with these issues.
Right. You can support organizations working on police reform and racial justice. You can donate your time or money.
Okay.
You can go to community meetings, rallies,
Right.
contact your elected officials, and let them know that this is important to you, that you want to see them take action.
So it's about being informed, getting involved, and using your voice to demand change.
That's it. This isn't someone else's problem. It's a collective responsibility.
Okay.
We all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society. There are some things happening, some changes being made that, well, they give me hope.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, some cities, they've started implementing policies. Things like restricting chokeholds, banning no-knock warrants, and some places are putting more resources into crisis intervention teams, bringing in mental health professionals who can respond to situations that might, escalate.
So it's about shifting resources, rethinking those traditional approaches to policing?
Exactly. It's recognizing that law enforcement, they can't be the answer to every problem.
Right.
And it's investing in community-based programs that, address those underlying issues, the social and economic factors that can lead to crime in the first place.
We talked earlier about independent oversight boards. Can you explain a little more about how those work and why they're seen as such an important reform?
Sure, think of them as a way to hold police departments accountable from the outside.
Right.
They're made up of people from the community who review complaints. When someone says an officer did something wrong,
Okay.
they investigate those allegations, and they can recommend disciplinary action.
So it's about making sure those complaints are taken seriously, that the process is transparent.
That's it. Because when police departments investigate themselves, there's always going to be that question. Are they really being objective, or are they just trying to protect their own? Independent oversight boards, they can help break that cycle and build trust with the community.
Seems like it would be a no-brainer to implement something like that. But I'm guessing not everyone's on board.
Oh yeah, there's definitely some pushback. Some law enforcement groups, they say it interferes with their ability to do their job, that it undermines their authority. But I think it's important to remember, real accountability, it doesn't weaken law enforcement, it actually makes it stronger.
Because it creates that trust, which is so vital for effective policing.
Exactly. When communities trust the police, they're going to cooperate, report crimes, work together to make their neighborhoods safer. It's a win-win for everyone.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. Police misconduct, systemic racism, the urgent need for reform. It can feel pretty overwhelming. But I think it's important to end on a note of action. What can our listeners do to actually be part of the solution?
Stay engaged. This isn't a one-time conversation. It's an ongoing process. Stay informed. Keep reading articles, watching documentaries, listening to podcasts like this one that dive into these complex topics.
So education is key. But what about going beyond that, actually taking action?
There are lots of ways to get involved. You can support organizations working on police reform and racial justice. Donate your time, donate money,
Okay.
go to community meetings, rallies,
Yeah.
contact your elected officials. Let them know this matters to you, that
Hmm.
you expect them to prioritize these issues.
So it's about being informed, getting involved, and using your voice to demand change.
Exactly. This isn't someone else's problem to solve. It's our collective responsibility.
Right.
We all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society.
Well said. And to our listeners, your voice matters. Stay informed, get involved, and never stop demanding justice. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.